Mi nombre es Marta Aguza Berral y pertenezco a la Universidad de Córdoba. En primer lugar, quisiera agradecer a la organización de este segundo Congreso Internacional COSITES por darme la oportunidad de compartir mi investigación en este foro sobre el cuerpo. And I am going to switch into English now in order to give my presentation, which I have titled Embodied Experience and Relational Subjectivity in Elizabeth Strout's My Name is Lucy Barton. I would like to begin with a short introduction to this presentation. First of all, Elizabeth Strauss is a contemporary American novelist who is the author of many different series, and her novel, the novel we have analyzed for this presentation, is My Name is Lucy Barton, which is the first installment of a series of currently 5 novels, and there is going to be a sixth one. The novel explores illness. The protagonist, who is Lucy Barton, is ill. We don't know exactly the kind of illness that she is suffering, but because of this illness, she is confined to a hospital room for many days. And there is also a kind of a remembrance of her past life because her mother visits her in this hospital room, and thus the hospital room becomes a sort of narrative frame for subjectivity. The focus of this novel is on embodiment, on vulnerability because of the illness of the protagonist, and also of relational ties between the protagonist and the people that inhabit her life. There is a theoretical context that I am going to clarify in the next slide, which is centered or focused on effect theory, on medical humanities, and on phenomenology. So we are going to delve now into the theoretical framework. First of all, as I have already anticipated in the introduction, there is a theory that we must mention. It is mandatory, which is Phenomenology by Merleau-Ponty. This author described body as a lived medium of perception of oneself, of onehood. And this is very important for this novel because Lucy is presenting herself through her body experience. Then we also have to mention vulnerability, a concept coined mainly by Judith Butler. It represents a precarious life as a basis for ethics, for political and social ethics. And in relation to ethics, we also must mention the ethics of care developed by Tranto and Feynman, who discuss how dependency is a universal condition of human beings. We also must mention trauma theory, something developed by many critics, but especially by Caruth, which represent related and embodied memory. And last, I would like to mention Levinas' ethical demand of the others, face-to-face encounter, which is very significant also for this novel. I have divided my analysis of the novel into 3 main parts. First of all, we must discuss illness and confinement in the novel. So, as I have mentioned before, Lucy Barton is ill. We don't know exactly which illness she has because that is not specified, but her hospitalization serves as a narrative structure. And as the illness is not determinate, is not concrete, it can be an example of what critics such as Frank have called a chaos narrative, a narrative in which the reader is not fully aware of the things that are happening around the story. The confinement in the hospital room intensifies the dependence and relationality that the protagonist Lucy is having with, in this case, her mother, who is staying with her at the hospital and who is also this kind of source of past memories and past stories of people related to Lucy. And in this way, the hospital in the end becomes a liminal space, we could say, because in this space there are many things that converge, such as mortality, care, and neglect. Body in this context becomes a site of narrative emergence. Now, I would like to turn to the second point of the analysis, which I have entitled Memory, Poverty, and Trauma. Childhood poverty is something that the protagonist Lucy Barton has suffered, and also violence, which are two things that resurface in her illness because she starts to remember her past and her infancy when her mother comes, and thus there is a kind of embodied memory to this context of her past. There is cold, there is hunger, there's also shame because of being different from the rest of the people, and this social stigma because of being poor in her childhood. And there is also a kind of intergenerational trauma, we could say, because the father of Lucy's husband had experience in war, as well as Lucy's father, the two of them, but in very different contexts. Because Lucy's father was in the Second World War fighting for the US and the Allies, whereas the father of her husband, William, was a Nazi soldier and German soldier working for the Nazis. So, in this sense, when the family meet William and they learn about the past of William's father, there is a sort of violence between the two. It's not physical violence, but a sort of traumatic violence and violence, social violence, in the sense of ignoring him and just cutting ties with Lucy in a way. And in this way, trauma emerges as fragmented sensory recollections, something that Caruth, critics such as Caruth and Marian Hirsch have discussed in the works. In writing, because Lucy Barton is herself writing her own story many years later, writing in this novel becomes a way of rearticulation of one story, which is a lesson by Sarah Payne. Sarah Payne is an author which appears in the story of Lucy Barton because she has read her novels and she starts to go into a sort of workshop given by Sarah Payne in order to become a writer herself, and she learns how writing is a rearticulation of one's story. And last but not least, I would like to discuss the relationality and ethics of this novel. We could say that the mother and daughter reunion represents many different stages, such as silence, the silent state between the two, vigil. Her mother is always watching her daughter sleeping in the night, and also a tacit care. There's this tacit care because a mother has to care about the child, even though they have not a sort of close relationship at all. And there is also the representation of the children's fear and maternal vulnerability and resilience in this pair of characters. There's also the stranger's case represented in the novel because of a AIDS patient that Lucy meets in the hospital and that remembers her of a friend that she had in the past and who was also ill with AIDS. And this may recall Levinatian ethical encounter. Relationality here is marked by ambivalence, by failure, by persistence also, and bonds become a sort of cruel optimism, what Berland terms cruel optimism, something that is sustaining but at the same time is wounding. And this leads me to the conclusions of this analysis. First of all, we can conclude that illness foregrounds body as a side of meaning and not just a background. Memory is important here because trauma resurfaces through embodied vulnerability, as we have seen. Also, relationality emerges from fragility, and this shows ethical connections between the characters. And the novel also challenges body, mind, and self, other, and illness meaning binaries, as we have demonstrated. And at the end, we could say that literature becomes a tool for narrating embodied experience and interdependence between the characters or between people, even. Now, here are a few references that I have used for this analysis, and I would like to thank you very much for the attention that you have paid to me. And I would like to say that I will be very happy to answer any questions, queries, or comments you may have regarding this presentation in the comments. And I thank you very much for your attention again. Thank you.